Have you ever found yourself truly wondering what happens in the psyche of a person who has always required absolute control once they come to the jarring realization that they are no longer in command of anything? Consider for a moment the individual who projected an image of being entirely untouchable, brimming with confidence, and seemingly immune to the pressures of life, now suddenly confronting a reality they never anticipated and for which they are entirely unprepared. What you are about to explore may fundamentally shift the way you perceive and understand the dynamics of narcissistic behavior. The loss of control is consistently one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences for a narcissistic individual, because control is not merely a preference or something they happen to enjoy. It is an essential pillar upon which they build their entire sense of security and their perception of self-worth. In the context of many relationships, they become deeply accustomed to knowing exactly how the other person will behave or respond to them. They operate under the expectation of having constant access to that person, demanding ongoing attention, requiring specific emotional reactions, insisting on immediate forgiveness, and expecting continued availability. Over time, this established predictability fosters a profound feeling of power within them. They begin to internalize the belief that no matter what circumstances arise, the other person will remain firmly within their emotional orbit and permanently within reach. When that other person finally decides to walk away and takes the necessary steps to maintain firm, unyielding boundaries, that pervasive sense of certainty suddenly evaporates into thin air. The narcissistic individual finds themselves unable to accurately predict what that person is currently thinking, what they are feeling, or even what they are doing in their day-to-day life. They lose the ability to influence the flow of conversations. They can no longer trigger the specific emotional reactions they once relied upon, and they lose the power to shape the narrative of the relationship to suit their needs. This profound loss of influence creates an intense state of discomfort because it effectively removes a foundational source of psychological stability that they may have relied upon for many years. What makes this transition particularly difficult to navigate is that the narcissist frequently interprets the other person's newfound independence as a direct personal threat rather than a standard, healthy component of human relationships. The exact moment that a former partner becomes emotionally unavailable, begins making life decisions without seeking input, and stops looking for their approval, the narcissist is confronted with a harsh reality that they struggle deeply to accept. They are no longer the central figure in that person's emotional world. This realization can act as a catalyst for a surge of frustration, intense anger, escalating anxiety, obsessive patterns of thinking, and repeated desperate attempts to regain contact or reestablish their former influence. Often, the distress they experience is less about the loss of love in the traditional sense and far more about the crushing loss of the ability to control access, dictate attention, and predetermine emotional outcomes. When that specific control vanishes, it exposes deep-seated insecurities and latent fears that had previously remained hidden beneath a carefully constructed veneer of superiority. The narcissistic identity is often heavily, perhaps entirely, dependent on external validation because their inner sense of self is not as stable or as internally grounded as it may appear to the outside observer. While they may project an aura of confidence, absolute certainty, and self-assurance to the world, much of that image is frequently sustained through the reactions they provoke in other people. Praise, admiration, consistent attention, public recognition, and even the intensity of emotional responses serve as the primary evidence they use to prove to themselves that they are important, desirable, powerful, or superior. Rather than generating a consistent, healthy sense of worth from within their own character, they often rely on others to provide that reinforcement over and over again. This pervasive dependence on validation can affect nearly every facet of their daily lives. Within their personal relationships, they may seek constant reassurance, excessive admiration, or deep emotional investment from their partners. In social environments, they may become hyper-focused on status, their physical appearance, their list of achievements, or the specific impressions they create among their peers. Even criticisms that might seem trivial or minor to others can feel disproportionately threatening because such remarks directly challenge the carefully curated image they work so laboriously to maintain. Positive attention serves to strengthen that image, while rejection, indifference, or the loss of admiration can lead to significant, overwhelming emotional discomfort. When a person who once served as a primary provider of validation steps away from the dynamic, the narcissist may experience much more than the simple loss of a relationship. They are essentially losing a vital source of psychological reinforcement that helped sustain their entire self-image. Suddenly, the steady stream of compliments, the predictable attention, the reliable emotional reactions, and the easy availability they once counted on are no longer guaranteed. This transition can spark feelings of intense insecurity, rising anxiety, deep frustration, or even a period of obsessive fixation. They may frantically search for new sources of validation, attempt to regain access to their old sources, or become entirely preoccupied with the need to prove their value to others. The deeper issue at play here is not simply a desire for attention. It is a profound reliance on external approval to maintain a functional sense of identity, personal significance, and emotional stability when faced with the weight of their own internal self-doubt. The practice of no contact creates immense psychological pressure because it effectively removes the channels through which a narcissistic person typically maintains a sense of influence, awareness, and emotional control. In many of these relationships, they become accustomed to having unfettered access to the other person's private thoughts, their innermost feelings, their reactions, and their daily routines. Whether that access is maintained through direct communication, monitoring their social media presence, reaching out to mutual friends, or keeping the cycle of ongoing conflict alive, these connections serve as data points that provide reassurance that they still occupy a significant place in that person's world. Even negative reactions from the other person can serve a functional purpose because they provide confirmation that an emotional connection still exists. When a policy of no contact is established and then consistently maintained, that entire flow of information suddenly comes to a complete standstill. The narcissist no longer knows what the other person is doing, who they are choosing to spend their time with, how they are feeling in their new life, or whether they are even thinking about the relationship at all. This void of uncertainty can become deeply, painfully uncomfortable because it creates a total loss of predictability. The individual who once seemed fully accessible, transparent, and manageable becomes psychologically out of reach, and that total lack of access often generates an increasing, desperate level of curiosity combined with mounting frustration. The pressure continues to grow because the silence leaves ample room for a barrage of unanswered questions. Without any form of communication, the narcissist cannot easily test their level of influence, seek the reassurance they crave, defend their fragile image, or attempt to shape the narrative of events. They may begin to wonder whether they have been completely forgotten, whether they have been easily replaced, or whether they have been permanently removed from the other person's life for good. The absence of any feedback can often feel far more threatening than a direct rejection because there is nothing concrete for them to respond to, argue with, or attempt to challenge. As a direct consequence, the practice of no contact often forces them to sit with a level of uncertainty that they would normally move mountains to avoid. The inability to monitor the situation, manipulate the circumstances, persuade the other party, or provoke a response can trigger a cascade of anxiety, anger, obsessive thinking, and repeated futile attempts to regain access. The psychological pressure they feel comes from the simultaneous loss of both their flow of information and their ability to exert influence, leaving them entirely unable to restore the familiar, toxic dynamics that once provided them with a comforting yet artificial sense of control. Ultimately, the ego begins to fracture when the carefully constructed image that a narcissistic person has created can no longer be consistently supported or validated by the reality of the external world. A great deal of their psychological stability depends on them maintaining a firm belief that they are truly exceptional, deeply desirable, incredibly important, or completely in control of their circumstances. This carefully constructed self-image acts as a protective shield against much deeper, often painful feelings of personal inadequacy, hidden insecurity, lingering shame, or vulnerability. As long as they continue receiving a steady flow of validation, admiration, focused attention, or compliance from those around them, that shield remains perfectly intact, and those underlying doubts stay largely tucked away and hidden from view. However, when a significant source of that validation is removed, particularly after someone finally decides to walk away and refuses to re-engage with them, cracks can begin to appear in that protective structure. The narcissist may start encountering concrete evidence that directly challenges their long-held assumptions about themselves. The person they fully expected to return does not come back. The individual they firmly believed needed them continues moving forward independently, living their own life. The level of influence they once relied upon so heavily becomes far less effective or simply disappears entirely. These experiences create a sharp conflict between the idealized image they hold of themselves and the harsh reality that is currently unfolding around them. This internal conflict can be deeply unsettling because it forces them to confront difficult questions they normally go to great lengths to avoid. If they are as powerful and impactful as they believed themselves to be, why are they suddenly unable to control the situation at hand? If they are as truly unforgettable as they imagined, why is someone able to move on and thrive completely without them? These questions can trigger a state of intense discomfort because they threaten the grandiose self-perception that helps them feel secure and stable in their daily life. As the pressure builds, their emotional reactions often become increasingly pronounced. You might notice mood swings, a sharp rise in defensiveness, heightened irritability, patterns of obsessive thinking, and a much greater sensitivity to even the smallest forms of criticism. The individual may start to try even harder to seek out new validation, rewrite the history of the relationship to suit their needs, shift the blame onto others, or desperately try to regain a sense of control. Beneath these behaviors lies an ever-increasing struggle to keep their idealized self-image from falling apart, while the mounting evidence continues to challenge it, eventually exposing the very vulnerabilities they have spent years working to keep hidden. If this discussion is helping you to better understand the dynamics of what happened in your own personal experience, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more people find this kind of information, which can protect them from falling into unhealthy relationship dynamics. And it gives this community a fantastic chance to continue to grow. Obsession often replaces any sense of certainty when a narcissistic person loses the confidence they once had that they still maintain influence over someone they previously believed would always remain emotionally available to them. During the earlier stages of the relationship, they likely felt secure in the assumption that they understood exactly what the other person was feeling, how they would react to certain things, and how they would behave in the future. They frequently operate with the expectation that no matter how much distance is created or how many problems arise, they will still occupy a permanent, significant place in that person's mind. This sense of certainty provides them with a level of control and predictability that helps to support their fragile self-image. When that certainty finally disappears, it leaves behind a massive psychological void. The person who walked away is no longer responding. They are no longer explaining their side. They are no longer defending their actions. And they are no longer providing the emotional feedback that the narcissist craves. Instead of receiving the confirmation they need to feel like they still matter, the narcissist is left dealing with a storm of unanswered questions. They may begin wondering what the other person is thinking about, whether they have truly moved on for good, whether someone else has stepped in to take their place, or even whether they are being remembered at all in the present moment. This total lack of information can become increasingly difficult for them to tolerate. As a direct result, their thoughts about their former partner may start to become much more frequent and intrusive. The narcissist may find themselves constantly replaying past conversations, revisiting old memories, obsessively analyzing events, or searching for any tiny clues that might help explain what exactly went wrong. They might resort to monitoring social media, asking mutual acquaintances for pieces of information, or creating elaborate scenarios in their own mind just to fill in the gaps left by this new uncertainty. What was once a position of total confidence gradually turns into a state of intense, consuming preoccupation. This obsession is not necessarily driven by genuine love, emotional intimacy, or any form of real concern for the other person. Much more often, it is fueled entirely by the deep discomfort of not knowing what is happening. Human beings naturally seek out closure and a sense of understanding in their lives. But for someone who relies so heavily on having absolute control, this level of uncertainty can feel especially and even uniquely threatening. The inability to predict, influence, or access the other person's inner world effectively transforms their former confidence into a rigid fixation, creating a circular loop of rumination that becomes increasingly difficult for them to escape. It is worth noting that replacement supply often fails because entering into a new relationship cannot automatically solve the deep-rooted emotional and psychological issues that existed long before the previous relationship finally ended. Many people mistakenly assume that when a narcissistic person quickly moves on to someone new, it is a clear sign that they have fully recovered, that they have forgotten the past, or that they have finally found something much better. In reality, the new relationship frequently serves as little more than a temporary, superficial source of validation, rather than a genuine resolution of their deeper insecurities. At the very beginning of the new dynamic, a new partner may provide the admiration, the constant attention, the excitement, and the emotional investment that the narcissist is desperate for. This can create a powerful, immediate sense of relief for the narcissist because it effectively restores many of the things they feel they have recently lost. The constant attention reassures them that they are still seen as desirable. The fresh admiration supports their fragile self-image. The novelty of the new person acts as a distraction from the heavy feelings of rejection, loss, or uncertainty they have been carrying around.